Hi there, welcome to Jville Stories. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notifications to get updated when interesting stories are uploaded. Thank you. Eric Mensah sat quietly in the back seat of the taxi, his gaze fixed on the bustling streets of Accra as they rolled past the window. The vibrant scenes of Labone, where he had spent his entire life, gave way to the sprawling city, alive with honking cars, street vendors shouting their wares, and the rhythmic sounds of high-life music spilling from nearby shops. For the first time, he felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. Today marked the start of a new chapter, his journey to the University of Ghana, Legon, where he would pursue his lifelong dream of becoming a writer. The taxi pulled up to the university's main entrance, its grand stone archway standing as a symbol of endless possibilities. Eric stepped out, clutching his suitcase tightly, and looked around at the flurry of activity. Students bustled about, some dragging luggage into hostels, others reuniting with friends or heading off to their first classes. The energy in the air was palpable, and Eric couldn't help but smile despite his nerves. This was where his future began. After settling into his hostel, a modest room shared with two other students, Eric decided to explore the campus. He wandered past lecture halls, manicured lawns, and bustling cafeterias, taking the sheer size and beauty of the university. It felt like a world of its own, full of possibilities and stories waiting to be written. As he strolled near the library, a colorful flyer on a bulletin board caught his eye. In bold letters, it announced literary night, book readings and discussions, all welcome. The event was scheduled for that evening, and Eric felt a thrill of anticipation. A night filled with stories and like-minded people was exactly what he needed to feel at home in this new environment. Later that evening, Eric made his way to the event. The auditorium was already buzzing with activity, the seats filled with students and faculty eager to immerse themselves in the world of words. The stage was simple but inviting, with a lectern framed by a backdrop of bookshelves. Eric took a seat near the middle, scanning the room with quiet curiosity. The readings began, and one by one, speakers took to the stage, sharing excerpts of their work, poems, short stories, and essays. Eric listened intently, his mind racing with inspiration. These were his people, he thought. This was where he belonged. During the intermission, Eric's attention was drawn to a young woman seated a few rows ahead. She was scribbling in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. Something about her demeanor intrigued him. She seemed both focused and completely at ease in the crowded room. Summoning his courage, Eric approached her. "Hi," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "I'm Eric. Are you enjoying the event?" She looked up, startled at first, then smiled warmly. "I am. It's amazing to see so much talent in one place. I'm Miriam, by the way." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long, they were talking about their favorite books, their writing inspirations, and the stories that had shaped them. Miriam's passion for literature was infectious, and Eric found himself captivated not just by her words, but by her quiet confidence and enthusiasm. By the time the night ended, Eric knew he had made a connection that would be significant in his journey. Miriam wasn't just another student. She was someone who understood the power of stories, just like he did. As he walked back to his hostel, Eric couldn't help but feel that their meeting was the beginning of something extraordinary. Eric couldn't stop thinking about Miriam after their conversation at literary night. Her passion for stories and her ability to articulate ideas with such clarity had left a lasting impression on him. The next morning, as he sat in his first class, a lecture on African literature, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. She had mentioned how Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun changed the way she saw storytelling, and he wondered how many other literary treasures she had discovered. Over the next few days, Eric kept an eye out for her as he moved between classes, the library, and his hostel. He wasn't sure if it was luck or fate, but a week later he spotted her in the university library. She was seated at a table near the window, completely engrossed in a book, her notebook open beside her with lines of notes scrawled across the pages. "Mind if I join you?" Eric asked hesitantly, standing just a step away from her table. Miriam looked up, her face lighting up with recognition. Eric, of course, have a seat. He sat down, setting his books aside. What are you reading? He asked, nodding toward the novel in her hand. Season of Migration to the North by Taib Sally, she replied, holding it up. It's a masterpiece. The themes of identity and displacement are so powerful. Have you read it? Not yet, Eric admitted, making a mental note to add it to his list. But if you're recommending it, I'll have to check it out. From that moment, their friendship blossomed. The library became their regular meeting spot, a sanctuary where they could discuss books, writing, and life in general. Miriam was sharp, insightful, and always ready to challenge Eric's ideas, which he appreciated. She read some of his short stories, offering constructive feedback that both humbled and inspired him. You have a strong voice, she said one evening after reading one of his pieces about life in Labone. But you hold back sometimes. Don't be afraid to let your emotions bleed onto the page. Her words stuck with him, pushing him to dig deeper into his writing. In turn, Eric encouraged Miriam to explore poetry, something she had always admired but never tried herself. He was amazed at how quickly she took to it, her poems brimming with vivid imagery and raw emotion. One evening, as they sat under a large baobab tree near the student center, their conversation turned more personal. Miriam opened up about her father, who had passed away when she was a child. He loved books, she said, her voice soft but steady. He always said stories were a way to make sense of the world, to connect with people across time and space. I think that's why I write, to keep him close, to keep his voice alive. Eric listened intently, moved by her vulnerability. He could see how much her father's legacy meant to her, and it deepened his admiration for her. In that moment, he realized how much she had come to mean to him, not just as a friend, but as someone who had already begun to shape his life in profound ways. As their friendship deepened, Eric found himself wrestling with emotions he couldn't quite define. Miriam wasn't just another student or a fellow writer. To him, she was so much more. But would she ever feel the same way? The thought lingered in his mind, quietly shaping the path their story would take. Eric couldn't keep his feelings for Miriam hidden any longer. Over the weeks, their bond had grown stronger, and every moment he spent with her only deepened his admiration. He loved the way she would tilt her head slightly when deep in thought, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her favorite books, and her gentle laugh that always made him smile. He often wondered if she felt the same, but uncertainty and fear of losing their friendship kept him silent. One evening, as they sat beneath their usual baobab tree, Miriam was reading aloud a passage from a novel they were both studying. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and Eric found himself captivated, not by the words, but by her. He realized then that he couldn't keep his feelings hidden any longer. Miriam, he said, interrupting her mid-sentence. His voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. I need to tell you something. She looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. What is it? Eric hesitated, gathering his thoughts. I've been meaning to say this for a while now. You're an amazing person, and I think I've fallen for you. Miriam's expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and something unreadable. She closed her book slowly, setting it aside. Eric, she began, her voice measured. You're one of the most important people in my life right now. You've been an incredible friend, someone I can talk to about anything. Eric's heart sank. He knew what was coming. But, she continued, I'm not sure I can give you what you're looking for. My life, it's complicated. There's a lot I'm dealing with, and I don't want to risk losing what we already have. Eric nodded slowly, trying to mask his disappointment. I understand, he said quietly, though his chest ached. I just needed you to know how I feel. Miriam reached out and placed a hand on his arm. I value you so much, Eric. Please don't let this change anything between us. Eric forced a smile, but deep down, he wasn't sure if things could go back to the way they were. That night, he returned to his hostel feeling hollow. Confessing his feelings had felt like a release, but now it seemed to have created a chasm between them. Over the next few days, things between Eric and Miriam grew strained. They still met at the library occasionally, but the easy, natural rhythm of their conversations had shifted. Miriam seemed more guarded, and Eric found himself holding back, afraid of overstepping. Their friendship, once so effortless, now felt fragile. Unable to bear the awkwardness, Miriam decided to take a step back. One afternoon, she approached Eric after class. "I think we need some space," she said gently. "I don't want to hurt you, but I think some time apart might help us both figure things out." Eric nodded, though the words stung. "If that's what you think is best," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Miriam gave him a small apologetic smile before walking away, leaving Eric standing alone. He watched her disappear into the crowd, his heart heavy with regret and longing. Back in his hostel room that evening, Eric stared at the blank page of his notebook, his pen poised but unmoving. The words that had once come so easily now felt impossibly distant. For the first time since arriving at the University of Ghana, Eric felt completely lost. All he could do was hope that somehow things would find their way back to what they once were. Little did he know that life was about to take a turn neither of them could have anticipated. The days without Miriam felt like an eternity to Eric. He poured himself into his classes and writing assignments, trying to distract himself from the emptiness left by her absence. Yet every corner of the campus seemed to remind him of her, the library where they'd spent hours discussing books, the baobab tree where their conversations had stretched long into the evening. He missed her laugh, her insight, her presence. Eric returned home to Lebon for the holidays, hoping that being with his family might offer some solace. Christmas came and went in a blur of familiar traditions, his mother's cooking, his younger sister's excited chatter, the sound of carols playing on the radio. Yet, despite the warmth of home, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It was a few days after Christmas when the call came. Eric was sitting on the veranda, scribbling half-heartedly in his notebook, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Curiosity tinged with apprehension compelled him to answer. "Hello?" he said, his voice cautious. "Eric," came a familiar voice, though it was laced with urgency. It was one of Miriam's close friends. "It's about Miriam. She's in the hospital." Eric's heart stopped. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's not well," the friend said, her voice faltering. "She asked for you. Can you come back to Accra?" The words hit him like a wave. Without hesitation, Eric stood, already planning his return. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The journey back to Accra was a blur. Every moment felt like an eternity as Eric's mind raced with worry. He tried to imagine what could have happened but found himself dreading the worst. By the time he arrived at hospital, his hands were trembling. He found Miriam in a quiet room, her frail figure lying on the hospital bed. The sight of her took his breath away. She looked pale, her usually bright eyes dulled by exhaustion, but she still managed a small, weary smile when she saw him. "Eric," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came," he said, stepping closer, his voice thick with emotion. "What's going on, Miriam? What's wrong?" She hesitated, glancing down at her hands folded on the blanket. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said finally. "But I have cancer, stage 3. It spread to my lungs." Eric's world tilted. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Miriam," he began, but his voice broke. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it found his. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you. That's why I pulled away. I thought it would be easier for you." "Easier," Eric repeated, his voice rising. "You think I'd want to be anywhere else, but by your side. Miriam, I care about you. I love you." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Finally, she squeezed his hand. "I'm so sorry, Eric." Eric shook his head, his determination hardening. "You don't have to be. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few hours, they talked about the diagnosis, the treatments she'd already started, and the uncertain road ahead. Miriam confessed her fears, her doubts, and her moments of hopelessness. Eric listened, his heart breaking with every word, but he vowed silently to be her strength. When visiting hours ended, Eric promised to return the next day. As he left the hospital, the weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he was resolute. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with her. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of purpose. Eric didn't know how their story would unfold from here, but one thing was certain: Miriam would not face this fight alone. The next day, Eric arrived at the hospital with a notebook and pen tucked under his arm. Writing had always been his way of making sense of the world, and now, in the midst of Miriam's illness, it was the only way he could process his emotions. He found her sitting up in bed, looking slightly stronger than the day before. A faint smile lit her face when she saw him. "You're back," she said, her voice still soft but carrying a note of warmth. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," Eric replied, pulling up a chair beside her bed. He hesitated, then held up the notebook. "I thought maybe we could write together. You've always said writing helps you feel alive." Miriam's smile widened, and for a moment she looked like the vibrant, passionate woman he had first met. "I'd like that," she said. They spent the morning talking about stories they loved and sketching out ideas for a collaborative piece, something light-hearted and hopeful to counter the weight of their reality. Miriam wrote slowly, her energy waning after just a few sentences, but the spark of creativity in her eyes gave Eric hope. As the days turned into weeks, Eric became a constant presence in Miriam's life. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, stayed with her during chemotherapy sessions, and spent hours at her bedside, reading to her when she was too tired to speak. Their bond deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated, forged in the crucible of her illness. One afternoon, as they sat by the hospital window watching the sunlight filter through the trees, Miriam reached for Eric's hand. Her touch was light but steady, and when he turned to her, he saw a seriousness in her eyes that made his heart skip. "Eric," she began, her voice faltering, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been avoiding." He frowned, leaning closer. "What is it?" Miriam took a deep breath. "When I was first diagnosed, the doctors said it was stage 3 cancer. But last week, after more tests, they told me it's worse than they thought. It's spread to my liver." The words hit Eric like a blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. He searched her face, trying to process what she had just said. "What does that mean?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Miriam hesitated, blinking back tears. "It means the odds are even smaller now. The treatment might not work." Eric felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to say something reassuring, something to ease the pain in her voice, but the truth was too heavy to ignore. Instead, he reached out and took her hand in his, holding it tightly. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. "You're not alone, Miriam. Whatever happens, I'm here." Miriam looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't deserve you," she said quietly. "Yes, you do," Eric replied without hesitation. "You deserve someone who will fight for you no matter what." In the days that followed, Eric threw himself into being Miriam's support system. He stayed up late researching experimental treatments, read her favorite books aloud to distract her from the pain, and filled his notebook with letters he wrote to her, though he never showed them to her. Writing became his way of coping, a way to pour out the emotions he didn't want to burden Miriam with. But even as he clung to hope, there were moments of despair, moments when he wondered why someone as kind and brilliant as Miriam had to endure such suffering. He questioned his faith, his purpose, and the fairness of a world that seemed so cruel. Miriam, however, remained his anchor. Despite the pain and uncertainty, she continued to face each day with quiet strength, finding joy in the small things, a warm cup of tea, a new book, or the simple act of writing a few lines in her journal. Her resilience inspired Eric, giving him the strength to keep going, even when the weight of their reality threatened to crush him. As they faced the fight of their lives together, Eric realized that their story, though painful, was one of love, courage, and unwavering commitment. And no matter what the future held, he was determined to honor it. Eric's life became a cycle of hospital visits, late-night writing sessions, and moments of quiet reflection with Miriam. Each day brought its challenges, but in the face of her illness, their bond grew even stronger. The hospital, once a place he had dreaded, now felt like an extension of their lives, a sanctuary where their love continued to flourish, despite the looming shadow of uncertainty. One afternoon, Eric arrived to find Miriam sitting up in bed, a rare sparkle in her eyes. She had just received good news from the doctors. Her treatment was showing some promise, and for the first time in weeks, there was a sliver of hope. "They said the tumors have shrunk slightly," she told Eric, her voice trembling with cautious optimism. "It's not a cure, but it's something." Eric couldn't hide his relief. He smiled broadly, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "It's more than something," he said. "It's a reason to keep fighting." From that moment, Eric and Miriam decided to focus on the good, no matter how small. They celebrated the little victories, days when she felt strong enough to walk around the hospital garden, moments when her appetite returned, and the rare afternoons when she could laugh without wincing from the pain. Eric became her source of joy, always ready with a joke, a story, or a new chapter from his notebook to share with her. But it wasn't just about distractions. Eric had begun writing something special for Miriam, a story that captured their journey, their struggles, and the love that had carried them through. It was raw and deeply personal, and though he hadn't yet shown her, he knew it was his way of preserving their shared moments. One evening, as they sat in the hospital garden, the golden hues of sunset casting a warm glow around them, Miriam turned to Eric with a look of quiet determination. "Eric," she began, her voice steady despite the weariness in her eyes. "I don't want to waste any more time. I want to marry you." Eric's breath caught. He had dreamed of this moment but hadn't dared to bring it up, fearing it would add to the weight of their situation. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I don't know how much time I have, but I want to spend whatever's left as your wife. You've given me so much already, and this feels right." Tears welled in Eric's eyes as he took her hands in his. "I've wanted to marry you since the moment I realized how much you mean to me," he said. "And I'll spend every day making sure you know how much I love you." Their decision sparked a flurry of activity. With the help of their families and a few close friends, they planned a small, intimate ceremony. The hospital staff, who had grown fond of the couple, worked to make it special, decorating the hospital chapel with flowers and candles. On the day of their wedding, Miriam wore a simple white dress, her hair wrapped in a delicate scarf. Though she was frail, her beauty shone brighter than ever. Eric, dressed in a tailored suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him, her steps slow but steady. The ceremony was a celebration of their love and resilience. Surrounded by those who cared for them, they exchanged vows filled with promises of unwavering support and gratitude for each moment they had together. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause, and for a brief moment, the weight of their struggles melted away. That evening, as they sat together in her hospital room, Eric pulled out his notebook. "There's something I've been working on," he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. "It's not finished, but I want you to hear it." He began to read, his words painting a picture of their journey, how they had met, the challenges they had faced, and the love that had grown stronger with each passing day. Miriam listened intently, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered when he finished. "You've captured everything, us." Eric closed the notebook, taking her hand in his. "This is our story, Miriam, and no matter what happens, it will always be ours." That night, as Miriam drifted off to sleep, Eric stayed by her side, filled with a quiet determination. Their journey wasn't over, and he would continue to fight for her, one day at a time. Their love, forged in the fire of adversity, had become a beacon of hope not just for them, but for everyone who had witnessed it. And no matter what the future held, Eric knew their story would endure. Eric and Miriam's wedding became a bright memory in the midst of their struggles. For the first time in months, the air was filled with laughter and hope. Despite the simplicity of the ceremony, its significance was immeasurable. Their love had triumphed, at least for that moment, over the shadows of illness. Miriam, though visibly frail, radiated a quiet strength that moved everyone present. She walked slowly toward Eric, supported by her mother, her white dress flowing like a soft whisper. Eric stood at the altar, tears in his eyes as he watched her approach. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming gratitude, grateful for her love, her resilience, and her decision to spend whatever time they had left together. The vows they exchanged were not just promises, but affirmations of the journey they had shared. "I vow to cherish every second with you," Eric said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Through joy, through pain, through whatever lies ahead, I will be by your side." Miriam's smile lit up her face as she responded. Eric, you've given me more than I ever thought possible. You've shown me love that carries me through the hardest days. I promise to love you with all that I have for as long as I can. The ceremony ended with applause and joyful tears. Friends and family gathered around them, celebrating their union with heartfelt wishes and prayers. The hospital chapel, often a place of quiet reflection, was now filled with warmth and hope. That evening, Eric carried Miriam back to her hospital room, her laughter soft in his ear. "You're stronger than you think," he said, placing her gently on the bed. "You've amazed everyone today." She smiled up at him. "It's because of you. You make me feel like I can do anything." As they lay side by side that night, Miriam resting against Eric's shoulder, he couldn't stop thinking about how fleeting these moments might be. He resolved to make every second count, to fill their days with as much love and joy as possible. The next morning, they set off on a short honeymoon to Aburi Gardens, a serene and picturesque spot they had chosen for its beauty and proximity. The lush greenery and soft mountain air gave Miriam a sense of peace, and for a few days they allowed themselves to forget the hospital and its sterile walls. They spent hours walking through the gardens, hand in hand. Miriam often paused to catch her breath, but she never let her exhaustion dim her joy. Eric brought his notebook everywhere, capturing the way the sunlight danced through the trees, the sound of her laughter, and the way her eyes sparkled when she spotted a flower she hadn't seen before. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench overlooking the valley, Miriam turned to Eric with a wistful smile. "I wish we could freeze time," she said softly. "This moment, this view, everything feels perfect." Eric nodded, his heart aching at her words. "We may not be able to freeze it," he replied, "but we can hold on to it. In here," he tapped his chest, "and in here." He tapped his notebook. Miriam chuckled, her laughter light and melodic. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Eric said, pulling her close. The honeymoon ended too soon, and reality came crashing back when Miriam woke up one morning clutching her side in pain. Eric rushed her back to the hospital, his heart pounding with dread. The doctors ran tests, their faces grave as they delivered the news. The cancer had returned more aggressively than before. The treatment options were limited, and the prognosis was bleak. Eric stayed by Miriam's side, holding her hand as they absorbed the news. She didn't cry, nor did she show fear. Instead, she squeezed his hand and looked into his eyes. "We knew this could happen," she said quietly. "But I'm not afraid, Eric, not when I have you." Eric's voice trembled as he spoke. "We'll fight this, Miriam. Whatever it takes, we'll fight it together." Her eyes softened and she smiled faintly. "Sometimes fighting means accepting. I want to spend whatever time I have left living, not just surviving." Her words broke something in Eric, but they also gave him clarity. He vowed to make the days ahead meaningful, no matter how few they might be. With every chapter he wrote, every story he told her, and every moment they shared, he would show her the depth of his love. For Eric, Miriam's courage became his strength, and her unwavering grace reminded him that even in the face of heartbreak, love was the greatest gift of all. The weeks after their honeymoon were bittersweet. Eric and Miriam returned to the hospital, where her condition deteriorated rapidly. The cancer, which had spread aggressively, left her weaker each day. Despite the worsening symptoms, Miriam maintained a quiet dignity that inspired everyone around her, especially Eric. She refused to let the illness define her, determined to make the most of every moment she had left. Eric, however, struggled. He spent sleepless nights by her bedside, torn between hope and despair. Writing, once his solace, now felt like a futile exercise. The words he poured into his notebook seemed hollow, unable to capture the magnitude of what he was experiencing. Instead, he focused on being present for Miriam, reading to her, holding her hand, and ensuring she never felt alone. One evening, as they sat together in her hospital room, Miriam broke the silence that had settled between them. "Eric," she said softly, her voice raspy but steady, "you have to promise me something." He leaned closer, taking her hand in his. "Anything. Promise me you won't stop writing," she said, her gaze locking with his. "Even when it feels impossible, even when it hurts, you have to keep going. Your words, they matter. They'll outlive me." Eric's throat tightened and he struggled to hold back tears. "I can't imagine writing without you," he admitted. "You're my inspiration, Miriam. You're the reason I started in the first place." She smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. "Then let me be your reason to keep going. Tell our story, Eric. Share the love we've had, the moments we've shared. Maybe it'll help someone else find strength." Eric nodded, though the weight of her words felt unbearable. "I promise," he whispered. A few days later, Miriam's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. She woke up in the middle of the night, clutching her chest in pain. Eric called for the nurses, his heart pounding as they rushed to stabilize her. For hours he sat by her side, his hands trembling as he prayed silently for a miracle. When the pain subsided, Miriam looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and peace. "Eric," she said weakly, "it's okay. You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid," Eric replied, though his voice betrayed him. I can't lose you." "You won't," she said, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Not really. I'll always be with you in every story you write, in every memory we've created." Her words, though comforting, left Eric feeling hollow. He wanted more time to love her, to share dreams, to build a future they both knew was slipping away. The following days were a blur. Miriam drifted in and out of consciousness, her moments of lucidity growing fewer and farther between. Eric stayed by her side, refusing to leave even when the nurses insisted he rest. He read to her, reciting passages from the notebook he had started during their honeymoon. Each word was a testament to their journey, a love story etched in the ink of their shared moments. One evening, as the sun set over Accra, casting the hospital room in a warm golden glow, Miriam woke up and reached for Eric's hand. He leaned in, his face close to hers. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Eric pressed a kiss to her forehead, tears streaming down his face. "I love you too, Miriam, more than anything." With a final contented sigh, Miriam closed her eyes. Eric felt her hand grow still in his, and in that moment the world seemed to stand still. His heart shattered as the reality of her passing washed over him, leaving him in a silence so profound it was deafening. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable emptiness. Eric struggled to make sense of life without Miriam. Her absence was like a void, consuming everything around him. He avoided the hospital, the notebook, and the places they had shared. Writing felt impossible, the promise he had made to her a weight he couldn't yet bear. But even in his grief, Eric clung to the memory of her final words, the love and hope she had given him in her last moments. Though his heart was broken, he knew that honoring her legacy would be the greatest tribute he could give her. Somewhere deep within him, the seeds of her final wish had begun to take root. One day he vowed he would find the strength to tell their story. For now, though, he allowed himself to grieve, knowing that love had not left him, it had simply transformed. The weeks after Miriam's passing were a haze of sorrow for Eric. Her absence weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the love he had lost. Everywhere he turned, memories of her seemed to linger, the scent of her favorite tea, the sound of her laughter echoing in his mind, the unfinished chapters of their story resting in his notebook. Writing had once been his refuge, but now the blank pages seemed to mock him, reminding him of the promise he felt incapable of fulfilling. Eric barely left his room, isolating himself from the world. His family tried to comfort him, but their words only deepened his grief. He would sit by the window for hours, staring at the sky as if searching for a sign, something to anchor him in the storm of his emotions. The days bled into nights, and the nights stretched into endless silence. One evening, as he was sorting through the box of Miriam's belongings the hospital had returned to him, Eric discovered a small, sealed envelope with his name on it. The handwriting was unmistakably Miriam's, and for a moment he couldn't bring himself to open it. His hands trembled as he held the envelope, knowing that whatever was inside would be her final words to him. After several minutes, he finally tore it open, unfolding the letter with care. Her words, written in her delicate, familiar script, immediately brought tears to his eyes. "Dear Eric, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I know that right now, it feels like the world has stopped turning, and the pain must be unbearable. But I need you to know something. You gave me the greatest gift anyone could ever receive." You gave me love, hope, and a reason to keep fighting, even when things felt impossible. I know you're hurting, but Eric, please don't let this pain consume you. Don't let it stop you from living, from dreaming, from writing. Writing is your gift. It's how you connect with the world, how you touch hearts and change lives. It's how you brought light into my darkest days. Promise me you'll keep writing. Tell our story. Share the love we had, the struggles we faced, and the hope that carried us through. Maybe it will help someone else find strength just like you helped me. Remember, I'll always be with you in every word you write, in every memory we shared, in every beat of your heart. Love doesn't end, Eric. It transforms. And I know you'll carry our love with you always. I'm proud of you, and I'll always love you. Forever yours, Miriam. Eric clutched the letter to his chest, tears streaming down his face. Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling him out of the darkness that had engulfed him. She had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself, and now in her absence, she had given him the strength to move forward. That night, for the first time since her death, Eric opened his notebook. He stared at the blank page, his heart heavy but determined. Slowly, he began to write, not about his grief, but about Miriam. He wrote about their first meeting, their shared dreams, and the love that had carried them through the most challenging moments of their lives. The words flowed from him like a river, raw and unfiltered, each sentence a tribute to the woman who had changed his life. As he wrote, something shifted within him. The pain didn't disappear, but it began to take shape, transforming into a sense of purpose. He realized that sharing their story was not just a way to honor Miriam, it was a way to keep her alive in the hearts of others. By the time dawn broke, Eric had filled pages of his notebook. He closed it gently, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Miriam's letter sat beside him, a reminder of her unwavering belief in him. For the first time since her passing, he felt a flicker of hope. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Miriam's love was still with him, guiding him, giving him the courage to continue. Their story was far from over, it was only just beginning. Eric's determination to fulfill Miriam's wish became the anchor that kept him moving forward. Each day he would sit at his desk, her letter propped up beside him, and pour his heart into the story of their love. The pain of her absence was still raw, but with every word he wrote, he felt closer to her as though her spirit were guiding his pen. Writing became both a catharsis and a calling. Eric chronicled everything, how they had met, the laughter they had shared, the struggles they had faced together, and the quiet, powerful love that had sustained them through it all. The story wasn't just a testament to their bond, it was a message of resilience, a reminder that love could endure even in the face of loss. Months passed and Eric's manuscript took shape. Titled The Final Chapter, it was more than a book. It was a tribute to Miriam's strength and the hope she had instilled in him. As he penned the final words, Eric felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. He knew that sharing their story would be the greatest way to honor her memory. When the manuscript was published, it became an instant sensation. Readers across Ghana and beyond were moved by Eric's raw, heartfelt account of love and loss. Letters and messages poured in from people who had faced similar struggles, thanking Eric for his courage in sharing his story. Some said it gave them hope, others said it helped them heal. Eric realized that Miriam's wish to use their story to inspire others had come true. At the book launch in Accra, the auditorium was packed. Eric stood on stage, nervous but filled with purpose. As he spoke about Miriam, his voice broke with emotion, but he pressed on, determined to share her legacy. Miriam taught me that love doesn't end, he said, his voice steadying. It transforms, it stays with us, shaping who we are and how we face the world. This book is not just about loss, it's about hope. It's about the strength we find in love, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but it was one particular encounter after the event that truly moved him. A young woman named Ajoa approached him, clutching a copy of his book. "Your story saved me," she said, her voice trembling. "I lost my brother to cancer last year and I thought I'd never recover. But reading about you and Miriam, it gave me hope. It reminded me that even in loss, there's something to hold on to." Eric's heart swelled with gratitude. In that moment, he understood the power of Miriam's parting words. Their story had touched lives in ways he couldn't have imagined, and it was all because of her belief in him. As the years passed, Eric continued to write, his works often reflecting the themes of love, loss, and hope that had defined his journey. He carried Miriam's memory with him in everything he did, her voice a constant presence in his heart. Her letter remained on his desk, a reminder of the promise he had made and the love that had inspired him. Though the pain of losing her never fully disappeared, it softened over time, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. Miriam had given him more than love, she had given him purpose. And through his words, her legacy lived on. On what would have been their 5th wedding anniversary, Eric visited her resting place in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Accra. He knelt by her grave, placing a bouquet of her favorite flowers, white lilies, beside the headstone. "I did it, Miriam," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I told our story just like you wanted. And you were right, it's helped so many people. You're still changing lives even now." As he stood, a warm breeze brushed against his face, carrying with it the faintest scent of lilies. Eric smiled, his heart full. He knew she was with him always. Walking away, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Miriam's love had been the foundation of his strength, and her legacy was one of hope, a reminder that even in the face of loss, life could be beautiful. Their story, though marked by tragedy, was ultimately one of triumph, a testament to the enduring power of love. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.